Here we go. The next episode of Explore Simplexity podcast. Today we'll be doing a mutual interview and exploration of, I forgot, it was games.
Games, what are games? Why is it important? And how are they useful?
Okay, yeah. And maybe we should start with like a personal joy of games that we've shared. Um, I think I'm Gen X and you're kind of like on the cusp of Gen X and millennial.
I'm technically a millennial. Yeah.
Okay, but you're like very close to the Gen X line.
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere in there.
They're arbitrary lines anyway.
Right.
And so I grew up with things like Atari, and then it evolved into Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, and then, neighbor friends had Segas. And then we started getting into like computer games that were pretty simple. I don't know if you remember the original like Civ 2, 3, 4.
Oh yeah. MS-DOS, Monkey Island, King's Quest, all these really castle. Yeah.
And then we started getting into like the massive online games, EverQuest. And for
Before that, it was Ultima Online. That was the first taste. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember it, but I don't know if I actually played it. So I definitely remember Ultima, was it like six or something like that? So
hmm
like a role-playing game. And I guess they took the Ultima series and tried to make this MMO with it.
Yeah, it was, I remember distinctly. And when you're young, you have all these strange memories of this gray box with these red letters, Ultima 6. And then you had like 14 of those big floppy disks that you had to install like one after the other.
Yeah, with like the moonstones you had to collect.
Yeah, it starts with that gypsy in the woods, like, and you're mixing potions to figure out your personality or something.
And then you
Yeah.
cross the rainbow bridge into another dimension.
Yeah. You're watching TV and then there's some like obsidian stone, you get sucked in through some portal in the woods. Ah, yeah, yeah. And then Lord British greets you at some point.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to look that
Yeah.
up. I'm guessing somebody on YouTube has that recorded.
Oh, I'm sure of it. Yeah. But the Ultima Online game was the first one that was just like, holy crap, like there's someone else, some stranger in the world. And they're just walking around. And that was just like crazy because typically you could only play with your friend sitting next to you or dial up modem direct connect with someone you know.
Right,
But
LAN
this like,
games.
yeah, but it's like
We're definitely
network with like
into.
hundreds of people. But in that game, the sad thing was the hundreds of people there were basically waiting for you to collect a bunch of resources so they could kill you and take everything. So it was pretty brutal back in those days. It was like PvP was default. There was no easy mode.
I know we also got into LAN games like StarCraft, StarCraft 2, Warcraft, and eventually we got into Dota and then Dota 2. Oh, I was also like all throughout this, I was pretty into Magic, Magic the Gathering. And I still occasionally play that silly game, but I don't know how much of it's nostalgia and how much of it is like integrating new cards. Maybe it's a little bit of both.
It's a greatly designed game. Yeah, it stands the test of time for sure. And they actually put a lot of effort, I think, into putting out new cards and balanced sets that are enjoyable.
Yeah, and you can tell they've like seeded the storyline, so you could see like there's the planning's evident there, and also they have like mechanics where they plant the seeds and then like the combo cards come out or synergy cards come out later.
hmm Yeah, it's quality. They're not just pumping out stuff to make more money. I mean, that's part of their deal, but
They're definitely doing that. But in addition,
it's not like a new Marvel movie that comes out or something with like Ant-Man 7. It's like, oh God, that doesn't feel like that with Magic, is what I'm saying.
yeah, I guess for me it does feel a little bit like that because they're printing like primo collectible cards, which I guess is
hmm
good because like maybe they've in their mind like separated the, capitalist collectors premium cards versus like game pieces that you practically use. And I think that was the idea between having like the standard version and the foil, where like
Hmm.
the standard version is the one that you played with, and the foil was like, your collectible super premium.
Yeah. Well, there's also different kinds of players and, people who are interested in the game. Some of them like to collect rare things and have full sets, and some actually like to play the game, and there's somewhere in between too. So probably just trying to appeal to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Trying to think what other games that have been. I know you are super big on Arkham Horror. That's one of your favorite games.
I wouldn't say super big on it, but it's fun. I think it's a good introduction to like excuse me, RPG kind of games for people who've never done it before, because you can read the story cards and make a choice,
Mhm.
and do a simple rolls for to see what happens. Kind of like a D&D on rails that kind of plays itself.
Mhm.
So, um, no, that one's okay. I'm trying to think of, so like some of the first games that we played like really early on.
Monopoly, of course.
Yeah, board games are always good. We did, the Candyland thing, and um, all the card games we've played. But I was also thinking of one that stuck out in my mind, which was Tank Wars.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
remember that?
yeah.
Mr. Stupid, and they had like different
Like nukes.
levels of, yeah, characters. But I just thought it was hilarious. It was Mr. Stupid. He would like be shooting bullets off into the side and killing himself and stuff like that.
It's like completely random shot.
Right. I would just start laughing. I mean, I was at that age where I thought that was hilarious, and his name was Mr. Stupid. He'd just take everyone out with him.
It is pretty funny.
It is funny. It is funny.
I always love when game designers include that aspect of humor. And
Hmm.
that's actually one of the things I really appreciate about Magic. And I remember Gene loved this too. Like some of these cards had just the best flavor text that was just like makes you laugh.
Do you remember any by chance?
Trying to not off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't either, but I do know there was some pretty cute ones.
And I remember the games that we designed, the ones that I really enjoyed the most, had an element of humor to them. And
Mm.
so one in particular that I really enjoyed making was the Corruptor. And
Hmm.
we had some of the evil spells had these like ironic names to them.
Mm.
But like one was like you make a deal with the devil to like have a baby.
Right.
And so what I did was I think I put like Justin Timberlake and I called it Get Your Sexy Back.
That's right.
So that made me chuckle.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you're implying that Justin Timberlake sold his soul to the devil for his skills.
No,
Kind of like the guy on the
no,
rock and who made in rock and roll or whatever.
yeah, who knows? But yeah. So to me, the part of the joy was in the humor.
Hmm. Definitely. I think there's always just maybe it was just our group that we hung out with, but the like absurdist kind of stuff where like the more ridiculous the circumstance, the funnier it is. Like I remember I made a zombie survivor game, and they were like different like characters you could play in to survive, and one of them was the soccer mom who was like holding a bag of groceries. Just imagining her like fighting off these vomiting zombies.
Yes.
Just stuff like that where it's like totally
Exactly.
backwards. Yeah,
Or
yeah.
do you remember the what was that Dota character, the Goblin Bombardier or something like that? And they would
Oh
say,
yeah.
"Do not run. We are
Mhm.
your friends."
The techies. How can you
The
not remember the
techies,
techies?
yes.
Yes.
But it's so funny
Yeah.
how like, you have these enjoyable, humorous moments, and then like some of that like fades into the background, and then it becomes like
Mm.
super serious and competitive and like you're picking the techies because it's a strategic choice. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how those games can, contain both elements of like super serious competitive and just this like lighthearted absurdity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, I think it's probably a good segue into maybe start discussing, why games are good and important and useful
Yeah.
for humans and, development. But even as adults, you know, these are things we like to engage in too. So,
Yeah. So I don't know where you want to start. The developmental psychology, evolutionary.
oh, let's start with evolutionary. Yeah, that'd be
Okay.
interesting.
So from an evolutionary perspective, or at least if we compare the other mammals, animal kingdom, almost all mammals play fight or they play as part of their development. And you've probably seen like puppies play fighting or kittens play fighting. And
Lion
even,
cubs like wrestling and stuff.
yeah, or even like rats and mice, they do this kind
Hmm.
of wrestle play. And from the outside perspective, it looks like it could be pretty violent, but they wouldn't do it if they didn't have an instinct for it, and you have to assume that they enjoy some aspect of it. And Peterson makes the argument, I think it's true, is they're actually finding boundaries, right? You're like wiring your brain and your body to understand like what your limits are and what their limits are, and you also learn the sense of like reciprocal fair play, what we would call fair play, that there's this implicit ethic that animals learn through their play years.
Okay. I don't know if that ethic is necessarily applicable to rats and mice and dogs and lion cubs.
I
I mean,
think it is.
maybe.
And
Yeah.
so
Uh,
one statistic is that when rats are play fighting, the dominant rat will allow the weaker rat to win like 1/3 of the time. Because if the dominant rat would just always dominate and always win, then the weaker rat might get demoralized and give up. So there's this sense of, I enjoy the process of playing more than the aspect of winning. And so there's kind of like this instinctual, I guess you'd call it sportsmanship, in the sense of, it's playing the game that matters more than winning the game that matters. Like it's not purely about domination.
right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, playing the game too, it's also probably preparing you for when there actually is something that wants to hurt you.
For sure. Yeah.
So
And
you're getting those muscles exercised and the reflexes and all of that thing during the game playing.
for sure. And like even with wolves, they'll have these like battles. Even like adolescents and older wolves, they'll have these confrontations and battles, and the loser will sort of submit to
Mhm.
the leader. Now that is about dominance. It's not, we've gone beyond play into dominance in the more adult hierarchy, but there's an implicit ethic that the the winner, the dominator, doesn't like end the life of the challenger. Because you might think if it was purely Darwinian in terms of the individual, they would just wipe out any competitor to maintain their power and dominance, but they don't. There's a sense of submission. Why? Well, one idea is that they have they serve the not the tribe, what do they call it? The pack, right? So the second in command who challenged the leader can still be of service to the pack. And it's actually to the benefit of the pack that that one of them doesn't have to die.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times though, when it comes to mating and mate selection, it can be a mortal combat, if you will, especially for like these like elk and deer species.
Mhm.
When they're hyped up on their hormones and the females are obviously in heat, they will murder each other for
Mhm.
access, like for sure. But I guess my thought is the games when you're younger and just like kind of butting heads and doing that thing, that's preparing you, practicing for when you become an adult so you can actually go out into the real world, so to speak, and get access to a mate and reproduce. So I'm guessing I mean, evolution is very broad and there's lots of solutions to different kinds of evolutionary problems. And I think that's really interesting. I think more maybe the social animals can use this playing in games as more of like social bonding and um, kind of setting up a hierarchy, but it's like a group mentality. But I think these elk, they just kind of have their territory. They're pretty solitary, right? And when it comes down to it, it's game time.
Yeah, and I think it does depend on the species and how they organize. Like lions, for example, right? So that in a pride of lions, you typically have one male and then like a harem of females.
Hmm.
And I think the same thing is with like silverback gorillas. Like you have this one like giant alpha male and then some like harem of females. So when they start organizing like that, then I think it tends to be more violent competition.
Yeah, and it typically only happens in sexually mature adults, you
Mhm.
know, but these species still have this play phase during development.
Yeah.
So it's like a safe place to practice and get trained and when you're young and playing. But I also like this other concept you bring up of the maintaining some kind of social lubricant within the group and how the games can kind of be used in that way. What's really interesting, I'd like to actually see that study is the even like rats allowing the others to win the play. That seems pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I think it might be Yak Panksepp, but I'm not 100% sure certain.
Okay, cool. I'm sure we can find it and put a link in the description
Yeah.
if once we do. Yeah.
And then I'm kind of lost in terms of the outline, but the other person that comes to mind is Piaget.
Hmm.
And I'm like halfway through his book actually. It's called the Moral Development of the Child.
Mm.
And so his theory is that kids play games as a way to like pragmatically work out a social ethic. So it's not just about fun, but they're like learning social skills and negotiating, what happens. And I forget the sequence, but one is just like you play the game and then you have like unconscious rules and then you have conscious rules.
Yeah.
And
And
then
when
and
you're
then you like transcend and amend the rules.
yeah, but it seems to always start out as like mimicking the adults. It's like we're gonna play house and make pretend breakfast and like use the pretend vacuum or use the pretend lawnmower that makes bubbles. Or then you can move up to like playing bank, like we used to do that when we were young too, right? Like you go to the
Mhm.
window and you take the money or show them your card because that's what you see. So it's like
Mhm.
a mimicry thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I
And
think all that could also be gendered in the sense
mhm,
that, you know, girls are more likely to play with baby dolls, and play mom, and
mhm.
boys are like, I'd rather play baseball, thanks.
Yeah. Or they get their plastic hammers and yeah, they have
Or
all these
GI
toys.
Joes and Transformers.
Yeah, but that's not quite the same role playing. Yeah.
Well, it's imaginative role playing.
Hmm. Yeah. Or we had even a like doctor bag with like fake medical stuff, like stethoscope, and you pretend to be the doctor and the patient or whatever. Yeah. But I mean, those aren't, I mean, I guess those are games, but I'm sure. What do you think is the draw or the wonder, the interest in the child that just has that instinct to mimic the adults?
Well, I think it's part of how we learn.
Hmm.
Like, I'm sure you've seen have you seen the still face experiment?
Describe it to me. I'm not
I'll,
sure I
I'll, I'll
have.
link it in the
Yeah.
description for sure. Maybe I can pull it up now and hopefully we don't get a copyright strike. So what happens is they have this mother who is like synchronized with her baby, and
Hmm.
she's like saying hello, hello, and like talking with the baby, and the baby points, and mom looks and says,
Hmm.
and she's super
Hmm.
expressive. And then the the scientists say, okay, now I just want you to like stonewall your baby. Like
Hmm.
just have this like zombie-like face and don't respond or react at all.
Hmm.
Just be emotionless and stoic.
I
And so
have heard
she's
this. Yeah.
and so she's stoic, and then the baby's confused, and then the baby starts getting angry, and then the baby starts panicking, and it's
Hmm.
just like it's you can visibly see the emotional distress and pain because the mother's no longer responsive.
Hmm.
And so the idea is like we need to have that kind of emotional mirroring and responsiveness deeply.
Yeah. 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 I wonder, I mean, this is obviously wouldn't be an ethical experiment, but the brain is extremely plastic, malleable. It can adapt in different ways. So I'm wondering if the mother just wasn't quite as expressive, it was more stoic, if the baby would be freaked out by a very expressive mother. Like if there's some sort of habituation to however the interaction is.
Yeah, right. So you could imagine if you have an expressive mother who all of a sudden stops, right? You're used to the expressiveness, so it's like
Hmm.
shocking. And or conversely, if you have a mother who's like always stoic and you get used to that, and then she starts getting expressive, you might think, "Whoa, what's this thing?"
Right, exactly. Like some kind of bipolar manic phase is like, what? Stop. Who is this?
There's a whole line of research, and I'm sure you know, it's called attachment theory. And the
Hmm.
idea is that your attachment that you have with your mother primarily as a child, and also, you know, your family as you get older, really determines your like pair bonding imprint style. And then that's like how you unconsciously attach with future partners,
Yeah. There's like what, three or four styles?
depending on who you talk to.
They all,
um
yeah, different ideas and theories.
yeah. So the basic ones are the secure attachment and insecure attachment. And then the insecure breaks down into like two or three, depending on who you talk to. So one is where you have like a withdrawn, and the other one is you're more volatile, and the other one's chaotic.
Hmm. And then the secure, is there just like the one kind of secure attachment?
Yeah, just secure attachment.
Right. Okay.
And some psychologists call that basic trust.
Hmm. Right. Reminds me of Eric
That's
Erickson's
exactly it. I think Erickson
like
is the one that did the basic trust as
trust
like
versus
the
mistrust.
first developmental level.
Hmm. Right. In terms of responsiveness and providing for needs, like
Mhm.
crying and someone comes, that's kind of a trust versus mistrust rather than like you cry, no one comes, and sometimes they do. It's just like, what is this crazy world I've come into?
Yeah,
Very
and that's
unpredictable.
fundamentally the same thing as attachment theory. Like if you're securely
Hmm.
attached and you ask for something, you expect your needs to be met.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
So,
when
okay, this is, no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was saying when your needs aren't met, you can either have the expectation of abandonment, or you can have you can get angry about your needs not being met, or you had someone who is like chaotic, where like sometimes
Hmm.
they meet your needs, sometimes they ignore you, sometimes they punish you, and you're just like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really early. Um, and what I was just gonna kind of segue into is the kind of going back to this game thing. So
Hmm.
Eric Erickson has, I think it was like 12 stages. That's a lot. Maybe that was too many. But one of them, I think, where the games start taking place is this, I think it's industry versus inferiority,
Hmm.
might be one of those, is where you're trying to like show that you can do things and you're trying to mimic your parents. Maybe I'll just look up that list right now.
And while you're looking that up,
Hmm.
there's like two fundamental domain, well, maybe more than two, but two fundamental domains of development. So one is attachment in terms of your they call it primary caregiver. Let's just say your mother.
Hmm.
And then the second realm is with your peers. And there's a very special development that happens between your peers that's different from the intimate pair bonding with your mother.
Very true. Yeah. So those hold a special place in your psychological development.
Right.
Parents, but specifically the mother. Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely. Yeah, so I just looked up this stage. So I guess initiative versus guilt is ages 3 to 5.
Hmm.
And then autonomy versus shame and doubt is the one before that. And then trust versus mistrust. Yeah. Industry versus inferiority is 5 to 12 years. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like kids start playing at a pretty young age. Or maybe, I don't know if it's actually like a game necessarily, but they interact
Yeah.
in different ways, probably try to figure out what can I do? How are they going to respond to what I do? I don't know maybe if that is much of a game. I
Might
think a
be.
game is it's like known to be uh kind of safe and pretend. Like I think that you have to have that some kind of cognitive ability to understand that.
Yeah. And then you could ask what is a game?
Hmm.
And you could say, so the basic definition is you have a goal and you have a set of rules
Hmm.
about how to achieve the goal. And so that's the basic definition. Although there are some weird games that don't really have a goal other than the process itself.
Hmm.
So one example of that is, well, like you said, playing house. Like what's the goal? Well, you just play until you get bored. Now there might be an unconscious goal or like programmed goal of like learning human skills, like how to be a human, but you're not consciously thinking that. And a more another comedic example is something like a drinking game. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, you have these crazy rules about when you drink, but like what's the goal? Like how do you win? And the answer is, well, everybody gets drunk. So there's not like a
Yeah. But it's usually also like making fun of whatever movie you're watching too, a little bit. Like if something just happens so often, you know?
oh yeah, I mean that's definitely one form of drinking game, but there are a lot of drinking games,
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
Right.
the King's Cup or whatever, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're usually pretty simple, but the idea is to get blasted. Is King's Cup? I've never actually done that one, but is that the one where like there's a cup in the middle and you like mix everyone's drink together and they have to like drink this horrible concoction?
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So I
Oh man.
and there's
It's
so
like a
many
college game.
permutations of things, but yeah, so like there's certain like penalties where you take a drink, and there's certain like penalties where you add some of your drink to the center cup, and then
Hmm.
like some, I don't know, Queen of Spades type card it makes you
Hmm.
drink it all. It's like the
Yeah.
unjackpot.
But then it's almost like you kind of want to get that because that you'll be the center of the story, but at the same time, it's like an awful thing to have to do.
Well, I forget what was I think there's it's similar to King's Cup. There's like this game called Mao. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes, you like make up rules and it gets more complicated as you go, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
every time you mess up a rule, you take a drink. But you
Hmm.
can imagine the more you take drinks, the more you mess up the rules. So somebody
It's like I do remember. It's like
gets
all right, you
out
get
very quickly.
well in that game they just get an extra card, and the idea is to get rid of your cards, right?
Well, that's the sober version.
Right, right. But I do remember we had so many rules. Like if you say wait or what or ask a question, so then you like give them a card, like, huh? Then you give another card. Wait a second, two more cards. It's like, no.
Yeah, yeah. So that's definitely in the domain of absurd fun.
Yeah, yeah. For some reason. Yeah, it's some good times. Okay, so we've determined that even like animals play, and there's different reasons for that. One is to maybe prepare them for actual competition in their life when they become adults. The other is to form a social bond and kind of a group um uh Oh, there's a word for that. Altruism? Or no, it's not altruism, but it's some kind of
Reciprocal
social
altruism.
reciprocal altruism, maybe some kind of
Mm.
cohesion within the group, so that the group is uh, the sum of the parts is greater.
And that, or the
Um,
reciprocity ethic, you might call it that.
mhm. I have an issue. I don't know why. I have a block in my head where ethics and like rats interacting just does not compute for me.
Okay, I mean, technically, uh, ethics is a branch of philosophy, so you could argue that you need language and philosophy in order to have an ethic. But then there's the idea that an ethic is an implicit morality that, you know, is part of game theory that's like built into your
Yeah.
survival
Could be a
instincts.
little bit of both. Maybe like social contract maybe. It's kind of like this unspoken like boundaries that you set
Well, and
between
so there's
people.
this idea, and we last time we were talking about language, and
Hmm.
it's like, is it possible to have morals and ethics without language? And the answer seems to be yes. And this is part of Piaget's theory that there's like this implicit ethic in a game, and then it isn't until you develop language and cognition that you can articulate the rules.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting because maybe that's part of games too. Maybe is try to understand um, rule systems and the concept of fairness. Because maybe fair doesn't make sense until you're actually in a situation where obviously if someone is like has some kind of impediment that doesn't allow them to perform as well, it's an unfair game for them.
Yeah, or if someone's cheating. Like
Yeah.
there's a like a Jonathan Haidt's another guy I really like, and he has a book called The Righteous Mind.
Hmm.
And you also gave me this book called The Moral Animal, which is a similar idea. And the idea is that we have these moral emotions and moral intuitions, and one of the big ones is this idea of fair play, and
Hmm.
this idea that there are cheaters and cheaters should be punished. And there's all sorts of like game theory that goes into like, you know, this balance between like psychopathic cheaters and like reciprocal altruism. And you could have the psychopath parasitizing the reciprocal altruism, but then the reciprocal altruism people have to hold them accountable to like keep the system from collapsing. So there's like this
Yeah.
weird like balance between the two.
There's what are they like the Nash equilibrium, I think is kind of what they call
It
it.
might
Or is
be,
that
yeah, I
something
mean
that's
that's an
something specific?
economic theory, but I could see that probably playing into like some reciprocal altruism
Yeah.
thing.
I remember hearing some argument about you need actually a certain percentage of psychopaths in a society to maintain some kind of stable um, awareness of danger. Because if there were no psychopaths and everything was a utopia, then you kind of get lulled into this false sense of nothing ever bad's going to happen and no one's ever going to cheat me. And you get into these kind of like, you're not steadfast in being prepared for something. So there, it
So,
was like a 1%, just to have this, like the risk of something maybe you have to look out for is actually beneficial.
well, two things. So first, in a lot of tribal societies, if someone ends up being a psychopath, there is a collective execution. And the idea is that you have violated the ethic of the community, and we don't want to have your death on the hands of an individual, but since you've sinned against the community, let's say, the community collectively executes you. And in the Old Testament, right, this was stoning.
Hmm.
And in like tribal cultures, they'll have everyone like stab them with a spear or like burn them on a pyre. And this is the way to get rid of psychopaths and the sort of collective justice. So then the second thing is you don't necessarily need the psychopaths, at least in our distant past, because it was the other tribes that kept you on your toes,
Mm.
right? If you were too lax and too lazy, then the neighboring tribes would rape and pillage, right? They would kill off all your men, steal your women and
Hmm.
resources.
Hmm.
So the fitness, let's say, is demanded by external competition. Or maybe it's a cooperative fitness. Let's call it
Interesting.
that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I forgot where I heard that from. Um, where there's actually a certain percentage that's useful. So even these kinds of unusual, like maybe sociopaths is a better word. So they're anti-society and they like to cheat a lot. There was some argument to where there's some benefit to have at least some small percentage
Well,
of
it's
folks like that.
interesting because like in a modern society, right, if you encounter a psychopath, right, collective stoning is illegal, right? You can't do
Hmm.
that. But we've developed systems that account for that, right? Someone will get thrown into prison if they're a psychopath. And
Hmm.
what's sad about it, right? There's a give and take in these things, is that these measures that are put in place to protect from psychopaths, who are a very small percentage of the population, end up oppressing the 99.9% of people who are honest, hardworking people.
Hmm.
And I remember you told me this story. I'll never forget this, where you used to work at a bookstore. And it used to be that people would like walk into the bookstore and they'd buy their books. And it was this really cool, like college hangout environment. And some people stole books. And then the owner said, okay, we're going to close it off. You have to request your book and then we'll bring it to you. And after that, there was a lot less foot traffic. It was a lot less fun. And the overall profitability of the business went down, right? The net profitability decreased because there was this desire to stop the psychopaths. And so there's this tendency to overprotect from psychopaths that has like a net loss.
Right. Just like the institutionalizing some like protection against them causes the environment to be so unsatisfying that you just don't want to be there. Okay, I mean, and I don't blame the people buying books. Like, basically, we'll just take whatever book's on the top, and maybe there's like a torn cover, and someone's really particular about it, or there's writing, and they want to go through and see which ones they want and take the one that they like. And there's tons of reasons that it's kind of nice to have that freedom to
For
pick
sure.
what
And
you're
and like
buying.
for me, I love books and I like
Mhm.
just hanging out and seeing what's there. Like if it were just pure business, I mean nowadays I just order it on Amazon if it's pure business, but like
Mhm.
one of the things that's cool about Barnes and Noble is like they have a coffee shop and they have like you can peruse the books and like talk to other people who like books. So there's like a social aspect to it.
Yeah, yeah, and there was definitely conversations that would strike up in there because I mean it was a college textbook store, right? And
Mhm.
everyone got to get books, so sometimes you'll see classmates walk in. You're like, "Oh, hey, you taking that class or whatever," and they have a conversation about their schedule in the store, So, and that kind of, I guess, moved into the line. But your point is well taken that um, trying to stop this very small percentage of things can actually make things more unpleasant on a whole. And yeah, I don't know what the solution is. Just to let the sociopaths do their thing and just suck up the cost.
It's interesting. Yeah. And one current debate is like, what do we do with internet trolls?
Mm,
Like there are these people who are psychopathic in the sense that they hurt people. They're completely narcissistic and completely destructive, right? They offer very little to no benefit. And like, do we shut down and police the internet? Do we have like really strict requirements for participating? It's like, well, the whole spirit of the internet is to share information, and it seems like a trade-off. It's like if you want to
mhm.
have a free share of information, you got to accept that there's going to be a certain percentage of psychopathic people.
Well, like, so I grew up basically with the internet. I think you did too. Basically, when the internet first started to become available and you could do chats and you started to play games, like we grew up with so much just BS and trolling
Mhm.
on with in the gaming community or on posts where it's like we have a PhD in trolling like smell detection. Our troll detection is through the roof. So if we read something, it's just like, oh, come on. No one's actually this doing this and whatever. But there's another group of people maybe who aren't quite as into the culture who just can't spot that trolling BS nonsense.
I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and she was very distressed because this person had said something just absolutely horrible. And so they say they made this horrible, like untrue, ridiculous, insulting comment, and then they ended it with LOL exclamation mark. And I thought, okay, I'm not taking this person seriously. Like they have zero credibility with what they're saying. And she like took it personal. She was distraught. And I was trying to convey, most people who read this comment will know that this person is insane. They're a troll, and it reflects bad on them. They're not going to think bad of you. Um, but
Right.
yeah,
It's
there's definitely like a detection mechanism, and maybe that
definitely.
is a generational thing, because and my understanding too is like the younger generation has this weird, what would you call it, paradoxical, neurotic, like on the one hand they're overprotected with like safe zones and
Mm,
safe places and trigger warnings, and we can't hurt people's feelings. And then the other hand, they're exposed to the internet, which is like insanely toxic, if you want to use that word.
yeah, yeah.
So Jonathan Haidt has this new book. Um, I forget the name of it, but it's talking about how a lot of young people, especially young girls, have just skyrocketed mental illness. And part of it is that they're socialized online at a time when they're super sensitive to criticism, and the internet is just unforgiving. And he said, this is so brilliant. He said, we overprotect our kids in the real world and we underprotect kids on the internet. And
Mm,
that's just such a beautiful, concise description of the problem the younger generations are facing.
yeah, absolutely. And when you brought up the story of, your friend who was just taken aback with this horrible comment followed by LOL, that kind of person who responds and reacts of, "Oh, I can't believe you said that." That's literally what the trolls are trying to get. That's
Right.
what they say. You don't feed the trolls is kind of that's what they're saying. Don't respond to this nonsense and just let them have their funny. The more you react to it, the more they're gonna like keep upping the stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's got a really interesting bunch of points too with um, these mental illnesses. And I remember as a kid when we were playing games, if it was Saturday, like we just go out of the house. We didn't ask permission. It's like, hey, and you just call like your neighbors to try to find the person.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we'd be down at the park and what do they call them? Like latchkey kids. We kind
Yeah.
of had like a latchkey system.
Well, we had a
And
little bit of filtering. I don't know if you remember, we used to play this game called Killer, where you
oh
would
yeah.
like wink at somebody and then 3 seconds later they would die. And
hmm
everybody
hmm
had to like try to figure out who the killer was before everyone was gone. And one of the neighborhood moms was like, "Oh, that's so horrible. You're playing a game called Killer. That's violent. That's terrible. You can't play there anymore."
Yeah,
I
I
think we got a
remember
little bit of that with Magic the Gathering and
that one more so. Even Pokemon, there
mhm.
was a whole fad where the Christian community or portion of the Christian community thought they were like summoning demons and all sorts of things like that. But
But back
yeah,
to the main point, which is Height's point, in terms of developmental psychology, kids need to play with other kids because it teaches them social skills like personal boundaries, how to have relationships and friendships. And you work through this drama and you get immediate feedback from people, and you can get in tune with people. Okay, they like that, they don't like that. I'm accepted when I do this, I'm rejected when I do that. And if you're deprived of that, or worse, you're given this online conditioning, it could really distort your instincts.
oh, definitely. And I was thinking too, there are also trends. I don't know if it's economic, but some of it could be this cultural upbringing as well, where kids are getting first they're moving out later and later from their parents' house. They're getting married much later. They're having kids much later, even if they have kids at all. And everything is like been pushed back. I don't know what the statistics are exactly, but I know it's a trend across the board. And I'm wondering. if these kids are like sheltered from the real world per se to make you fear going out and doing things, maybe that's part of the development that just is kind of stunted. You're not allowing the kid to go out on their own and like figure things out or be like always having to ask for permission. Like
Yeah.
at some point you need to make your own choice and just
And
go with
skin
it.
your
Like,
knee and learn your lesson. Yeah.
hmm and maybe things like, yeah, moving out, that's scary if you haven't been out without permission before, like, but as kids we were doing it all the time, and there was a sense of, I guess, trust in just strangers a little bit more. Like we didn't think everyone had like a knife in their back pocket or some kind of unregistered weapon, or like that would never even entered our minds.
Yeah. And so Haidt talks about this too. He said, I forget what year it was, but what happened was there was a kid who went missing, and they have like lost dog posters on phone poles. But what somebody decided to do was to put missing kids on milk cartons so that if neighbors would like see the face, they would call in the missing kid.
Hmm.
But what ended up happening was everyone saw these missing kid posters and they thought, oh, there are kidnappers everywhere. We have to protect our kids. Like they're monsters.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so what
Yeah.
ended up what initially was started as a campaign to help and find people ended up creating a sort of moral panic where parents were overprotective.
Yeah, like I have an anecdote too from a university. So I'm at UC San Diego right now, and I was at UC Riverside too. But if there was an incident, you sign up your phone to be uh, warned about whatever happens. And I remember I had, especially like some of the women in my labs, they'd get these warning texts like, "Oh, suspicious person spotted on such and such a street," and you'd get them like weekly, and they're just like they were afraid to go out of the lab just because of all of these notifications. And the effort was to keep you informed and let you make your own safe decisions,
Mm-hmm.
but they were just terrified. And they asked I would walk them to their cars frequently
Mm-hmm.
from the lab. And I get it, but it's just like maybe all of these notifications are not helpful to know at all times for everyone.
Yeah. Well, some things I've seen, and so there was this group, I forget what they're called, but they were like this, pro-European group or something like this. And then there was this email that there was a hate group, white supremacists on campus that are, oppressive and evil. Now,
Hmm.
I tend to be libertarian, and my thinking is if these people have something to say, let them say their thing, and everyone will see how absurd they are. But if you try to silence and hide them, then they're going to become a boogeyman and they're going to go underground, and that's not helpful.
So sorry, can you back up? Who you talked about right now,
There was this group, I
or this
forget the
group?
name, I forget the name of the group. It was like Europa something.
Hmm.
And they were talking about like they put all they did was put posters up about their group, and it was there was this email that said that there was a hate group on campus and there was that white supremacist attack because
Mm-hmm.
words are violence. And uh so my point is it created this moral panic. These people were freaked out about a white supremacist attack when really there were just posters placed on campus.
And images, and yeah, right. So this is when kind of the I forgot what you called it, the stoning thing, the group justice. Like if
Oh,
someone
or
steps out
witch
and cheats.
hunting, yeah.
Well, that's exactly what I was gonna say is like when you take, but that was had some positive reinforcements in that example in terms of keeping psychopaths or sociopaths in check, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can take that same kind of mob mentality too far in the other direction with this witch hunt kind of thing, um, which is pretty scary as well.
Well, what's also disturbing and frustrating, like I've seen like gang writing in the bathrooms,
Hmm.
which seems to me racial and let's just say uh anti-white,
Hmm.
and it was just erased and nobody said anything about it. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, so there seems to be a double standard in terms of alerts and
Mm,
warnings.
could be. I know in the bathrooms too, like I guess it depends where you are, but like in high school or middle school or whatever, like kids would just write gang signs just because they thought it was like disruptive or something. Or they just write stupid things or make draw a picture of a penis or something just to have that shock value. And
Well,
maybe
I
that's all it is. And maybe
may
you should just paint it over and just be like, oh, whatever.
well, I went to a pretty rough middle school. I don't know if you heard
Yeah.
any of the crazy stories, but there was like gang activity and drugs, and now they have bars on the windows, and
Jeez.
they took some pretty pathetic measures to stop the gang activity.
Jeez. I do
Like
remember some story where they were messing with you for the way you wore your socks or something like that.
maybe I don't remember if that was just
Yeah.
mean kids or gangsters, but
Okay.
um
Yeah.
so I'm making 2 points really. So it
Mhm.
seems to me that this like racialized tribalism is bad, and it seems like all races have this potential instinct for negative racialized tribalism. And there is currently, at least in progressive circles, a crazy bugaboo about white supremacy. And statistically speaking, it's not really that big of a deal.
Mhm.
And I try to talk to people. I'm like, do you honestly think that white supremacists are going to take over the state of California? Like you really
Yeah.
think
Right.
that's a serious threat that we should lose sleep over at night? That's
Right.
the central concern of California, is that white supremacists are going to take over. Really, that's your
Yeah.
theory?
Yeah. I don't know. Um, I don't know. I'd like to kind of get a little bit more back on track with the games and
Yeah.
stuff. We kind of went off. I don't. I was trying to connect it somehow with like the witch hunt thing, but yeah.
We were talking about moral theories, we're talking about development, and we're talking about um, young women and how they develop an ethic and how the internet distorts things. And one of the distortions is fear mongering,
Mhm.
and that led us into this like political fear mongering. And we could even leave this for another date maybe, but talk about the COVID fear mongering, right? How much of that is like
Mhm.
rational and scientific? How much of that's fear mongering? How much of it's political? It's pretty
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. Maybe another day. I kind of like the idea of thinking about games and game theory and what that what's that all mean. Um, and we were talking. What was the last thing we were talking about in terms of like games and how they're playing a role in society?
We were talking about Jonathan Haidt, and we were talking
Mhm.
about girls in particular who are negatively affected by social media. And ideally, you'd have social interactions with people. Oh, I remember what it was, the milk carton thing. So we were talking about how,
Oh, and latchkey kids, and then you could
yeah,
be let out. Yeah, and then maybe that some of that freedom, right? So that was kind of connected to like how games can prepare you for the real world, and you have to go out there maybe and experience things yourselves, and kind of games are a safe way to do these things. But now even today, you can't do that, and you're kind of restricted. You're protected from the real world, I think is what you said, and
yeah.
um,
And so the statement was people are overprotected in the real world and underprotected online.
right. Yes, I think that was a really good, insightful comment. And then that threw us into this how like there's trolls on the internet and people are exposed to all sorts of stuff. And now it's also caused us fear in the real world. And then that's how that topic came about. Right. So yeah, so kids like, and then the point I made was that it's taking longer and longer for kids. I don't know if it's economic or why to move out of the house, get their own job, get married, get a house. It's like decades later or something crazy.
Yeah, and you
So
made an interesting observation, like how much of that is culture, how much of that is technology, how much of that is economic, like how much of that is it's a lot of variables.
And as always, and I like to point out, it's reciprocal, right? The culture affects the economy, and the economy affects the culture, and all of these things. It's always a two-way street.
Hmm.
It's like there's not one thing setting the standard.
Yeah, I was recently there's this comment on a video, and it said, "Man, your editor has ADHD," and then the response was, "Yeah, because people have shorter attention spans, and so we
Mm.
gotta have more cuts to hold people's attention." I'm like, "Yeah, but if you have more cuts to hold people's attention, then you're lowering people's attention spans."
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. So let's talk about games a little bit and maybe how the culture affects the games we play and stuff. So we were talking about EQ, right, back earlier. So in the EverQuest, like you literally had to get better at like jumping or like hit like a jump or I don't know, maybe falling. Like you had to fall off a cliff, and every time you did that, you could have a chance to increase your safe fall skill. So you would literally sit there for hours, like jumping off cliffs and like breaking your knees and like drinking potions
Hmm.
to get your skill up. And it was like something you did. And then like there was no map, right? You had to hit sense heading. You have no idea where you're facing. And it's just like you had to click that again and again. And it was this like ridiculous hardship built into the game. And it was like fun and rewarding. But if you tried to release that today with this attention span that you're talking about, this thing would get dumped within 2 seconds.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that because the successor to EverQuest was World of Warcraft. And one
Hmm.
of the big complaints from the EverQuest people was like, this is easy, you've nerfed it. This is for, people who don't have patience or skill,
Hmm.
etc.
Right. You'd have quest tracking where you'd see a little exclamation and you just walk to that and then walk to the waypoint. You don't even have to read anything. But like in EQ, it's like you actually had to figure out the right thing to say to the person. Or, I mean, most of these things were online. You could look it up yourself. But
Mhm.
there was a lot less safety rails. And like as we mentioned last week, I think with the economy talk, or 2 weeks ago, or whatever it was, um, you would actually have to barter and like the market would figure out the prices. But then with World of Warcraft, you just had like this automated eBay, just charge 1 copper less than the guy above you or whatever, and then you'll get the thing. And then it totally changed the dynamic of the game
Mhm.
and the culture. And you won't see those anymore. Now they're getting like everything is easier and easier and easier. And so much so, and not to say they're not fun, but do you remember Clicker Heroes?
Oh yeah. Mhm.
That was just like the absolute, like, I don't want to spend any time. My attention is so low and still have fun with it. There's
Right.
still
To the
something
point where
fun
the
about it.
game plays itself while you're not playing it.
Exactly. Right. And you're doing like 10 trillion damage, like whatever. Like the numbers get ridiculous, like E to the 172 damage.
Well, and I think there was a joke name, and maybe it was the developers that came up with this. They called it Progress Quest. And the joke was people get their dopamine hits off of making progress,
Hmm.
even if the progress is like illusory and ultimately pointless. And
Hmm.
the story is that that's what created Clicker Heroes. Like, let's just see how absurd this can be. And also part of the story, the the guy who then made Clicker Heroes 2, he said one of the reasons they made it is because they felt guilty about making something super addictive and then having people like dump their life savings
Yeah.
into rupees. And it's
Hmm.
like, man, that's so
It
wild.
was it was so basic. It was fun though. And they had a good sense of humor too. Like,
Mhm.
do you remember some of the characters? Like broil in the oven,
Oh, yes.
spelt in a funky way. But anyways, I just brought that game up because it just reminded me of the most uh short attention span, simplest like easy mode that you could get. But there was actually some choices that made the difference in how well you could do. So, And that progression was that's always there. I think we even talked about that a lot when we were doing our game design back when you were doing Corruptor and Zombie Game. Progression was a huge important part of basically starting out with almost nothing and building something up. Um, in almost any game that's pretty attractive.
Yeah, and you could argue that's a story, right? You have a beginning, you kind of evolve and grow, and that's building towards something.
Yeah, I remember there was a game idea we had that was kind of the flip of that, just because it would be an interesting thing where everyone starts out with the same amount of things, but the goal was to keep it or be the one who loses the least amount.
Mhm.
It was like a scarcity, just saving, protecting what you have. And I think when I forgot the game, but when we tested it, it was just not fun. Like that's like not enjoyable. Like it's more fun to get things and build your thing rather than like try to be the last man surviving.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there that can be fun, I think. And one game that does that pretty well is the Arkham Mythos. I forget which game it was, but like one of your stats is sanity, and
Mm,
like, everyone is slowly losing their minds, and whoever is like the most sane and can survive that, like they win the game by being sane at the end.
yeah. Well, it's all co-op for that one. But yeah, you do have to maintain your sanity. But at the same time, you're getting experience, you're learning spells, you're getting weapons and gold, you're completing quests. Like it feels, but while that's happening, you still have to maintain your sanity.
So it's interesting. There's like two directions I want to go. So the first one is the idea of, when do games become parasitic and counterproductive? I think
Mm,
we kind of know, but like that's the whole problem with clicker heroes and people spending their life savings on, digital rubies, which is similar to like a gambling addiction, right? You could
mhm,
argue that gambling addictions are a parasitic form of game.
mhm,
And then the other thing that's interesting, a lot of wealthy people, entrepreneurs, they talk about investment and money as a game.
mm.
And it's interesting because that is for most people, it's like a mindset shift because when people hear the word game, they think it's a simulation, it's lighthearted, it's fun, it's like a sandbox where you learn. But what a lot of these wealthy people are saying is, you know, money is real in the sense that you need it to buy stuff and survive in a survival mindset. But if you really want to be a business owner and entrepreneur, you need to think about it in terms of a game. And when you have that shift in mindset, I think it takes you out of the survival reptile brain and puts you into this like creative play state space in your
Mm.
brain. Like it activates those play circuits with the mindset shift.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, so I guess you talked to Jimmy recently, and I remember asking him like when he plays different stakes, like you can play like a dollar game, or you can play like you know $5,000 game or something. And this is a long time ago. I haven't talked to him in a while, but he mentioned that when you're playing the game, you should treat it as the game itself, and you don't think about the money value. You think about it as big blind, small blind, or some kind of arbitrary thing associated with your choice and decision.
Mhm.
And the moment you start to think of it as like $1 million investments or whatever, like these really wealthy people you're talking about, and they just start thinking about it as a game and oh, I'm making a move
Mhm.
and not the financial ramifications, you actually perform better at the game, I think.
Right.
Yeah, which is an interesting kind of strategy to maybe to allow you to think more rationally and less emotionally about these kind of decisions.
Yeah, and even the word strategy implies that it's a game.
Hmm. Right. But then there's other things that aren't quite as cool when it comes to like trying to game the system.
Oh yeah.
It's like maybe this shouldn't be a game, and like you being and finding the clever way to make more money might not be the best.
Yeah, and so to me that's parasitic gaming. but it's
Mm,
not parasitic in the sense that the game itself is parasitic. It's the way the game is being abused. Like we talked about the psychopaths, right? And that's where you have like sportsmanship, which is like this implicit ethic of reciprocity, whereas you see this in sports too. Like somebody wants, like they're narcissistic and they want the attention, they want the goals. They'll be like a ball hog, and like their team ends up losing because they're too selfish in their thinking.
mhm.
And so
Yeah.
there's another interesting, I think, abuse of the word game. There's this famous book called Games People Play. I think the guy's name is Eric Bryan,
Mm,
and he came up with this idea of, people talk about playing social games, or like if you're dating and someone is, oh, they're playing games, which implies they're not really serious about it, right? They're just going through the motions. They're not looking for a long-term relationship. They're just playing with you.
right.
And I think that's similar to the idea of gaming the system. You're like gaming or playing with people.
I was just thinking too about the bookstore analogy that you brought up earlier,
Hmm.
where people were stealing, and so then you had to make a rule to change things. And I think that's kind of a lot what happens too in the economy and like law and regulation. They can be so burdensome that it's just like starting a business just becomes so daunting because there's all of these rules and regulations. And the reason they're there is because people were trying to game and cheat the system in whatever way, and you had to keep patching the holes. And now you got so many patches and holes, like no one can make sense of it.
Right.
And it becomes extremely taxing,
It becomes an
pun
impossible
intended.
maze.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a biological analysis is this idea of parasite load, the idea that your body has a natural capacity to tolerate some parasites. And like a lot of people are just like disgust averse, and like even the idea that there are parasites just freaks them out. It's like, well, pretty much all mammals throughout time have had parasites. And actually you can track like evolution of species by the mammals, in particular by the lice that they have.
Hmm.
Because as their hair evolves, the lice species that goes with them like evolves with them. An interesting weird fact. Anyways, our bodies have a natural tolerance to some amount of parasites, and that should be
Hmm.
no surprise. But there's this critical threshold where if you have too many parasites, you just die.
Hmm.
And I guess the other extreme is if you have no parasites, it's like your immune system is underdeveloped.
Yeah. Or the other thing is you can have a synergy like with your gut biome,
Right?
right? These microbes in there, like you need those for many different reasons. And it's crazy how many connections they were showing with all these bacteria. And they're not necessarily parasites because they're actually providing a service, you know.
Yeah, I think they call that symbiosis, right? When there's like
Mm,
a mutual benefit.
yeah, totally. So it's just weird the way that, in the words of Malcolm, life finds a way. Just think of the Jurassic Park guy, Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or another way to put it, nature is very efficient,
Hmm.
and almost everything that survives has like some adaptive
Hmm.
capacity.
Yeah, I don't know about efficient. I think they find efficient, like nature finds efficient solutions, but they're definitely not very efficient with their time. Like maybe we'll solve this in 10 million years or something.
Well, and the argument is that the environment is constantly changing, and so what is needed changes, and those adaptations happen over time.
They do, yeah. Oh, I was just trying to clarify the efficient comment where they find efficient or natural selection finds efficient solutions, but it's not necessarily efficient in terms of how long it took to get there to find to find that efficient solution.
Yet time efficient, right? No, I mean I'm talking about usefulness efficient.
Right. Like once you have it, like it's amazing that they were able to come like it's able to come up with these kind of solutions.
Well, so here's something that I've been thinking about in terms of like sexual attraction, and maybe we can table this topic for another day. And
Hmm.
I'll present the idea. You tell me what you think.
Hmm.
So, um, a big part of sexual attraction in most species is scent. It's how you like animals can distinguish gender, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also like pheromonal arousal signals that come through scent, but human beings um, don't really seem to have that. And the reason I'm saying seem is because we've like artificially eliminated it. For example, toothbrushes and toothpaste are a relatively recent invention, right? Like floss is a relatively recent invention. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Toilets and sanitation is a relatively recent invention. And so then you think, well, how is it possible? Like if I am so riddled with disgust that I can't kiss someone who hasn't brushed their teeth, like how did humanity imagine manage to survive and reproduce? And the answer is that our ancestors found those scents erotic, and like there's an attuned uh, attraction to the scent of your lover. And
Mm-hmm.
there's all sorts of stories about, smelling the handkerchief of your lover, or smelling other things to remind you of your lover, that in a, sanitized world might sound gross, but in the natural world makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Perfect sense. But
Sense. But
and
so in terms of,
sensibility.
so my point is, in terms of efficiency, like we think, ew, you have bad breath, and ew,
Mm-hmm.
you smell bad. That's body odor. It's like, well, nature used that in the past as a form of attraction, not a repulsion.
Yeah. There was an interesting psychological study I think I saw in some documentary where um it's interesting where they had these like I don't know some group of men work out in these like white t-shirts
Mhm.
and they had pit stains basically and then they had these women smell these pit stains and then they had somehow the smell was correlated with their physical attractiveness in terms of a picture but they were
Yeah,
blind to who it belonged to or something.
yeah.
That's pretty wild. Like if that's true, I don't know if that's been replicated, but to to bring it back, you were asked or mentioning like I don't know if humans have this capacity to have the sexual selection based on sense, but all I'm trying to say is there definitely has been at least some evidence that that's true, and the sense is important, or maybe it has been historically, but maybe not anymore.
What's also wild, and I haven't verified this, but apparently there was a replication of this study, or maybe it was part of the same
Mm,
study at a different time. They did this with gay men. And it
mm,
turns out gay men would have the same like attraction to scent that women would have.
that's pretty wild.
It is very wild.
Wow. Hmm. Because you would imagine the scents being given off are very different. Like probably women and men are giving off different kinds of scents. Huh. That's crazy.
Right. And I've always been fascinated by this question of the evolutionary psychology of homosexuality, which seems to be a paradox.
Hmm.
And yeah, so there seems to be some deep like biological. So in the past, there was a psychodynamic explanation of like, you fell in love with your mother and like Freudian stuff.
Hmm.
But it's like if you're attracted by pheromones, you can't even see the person. It's just this unconscious aroma that arouses you, or that seems attractive to you. Like, how do you explain that?
That's pretty crazy. Yeah. I would not have anticipated that because the sense of smell is so linked to the primal areas. I feel like that would be a learned association, right? But that evidence would make the maybe the claim that it's not, it's more innate. If that attraction is so embedded even in these kinds of pheromone scents. I don't know. That sounds like a rabbit hole we can go down maybe on another topic because there's that one's loaded with all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's for sure. Yes, I'll add that to the list of topics.
Nice. Yeah. No, it's good to have a list.
But in terms of game theory, there's this let's call it battle of the sexes too. I don't like that term, but um, so evolutionary theory has multiple levels. And the idea is that, the basic is survival of the fittest, and that's that species adapt according to nature,
Hmm.
and that nature is what selects, right? So nature decides who survives and who dies. But then the next level of the theory is sexual selection, meaning men pick the women who are attractive and women pick the men who are attractive. So the sexes are selecting who reproduces and who doesn't.
Hmm.
And you could then expand that into, let's call it cultural selection. I don't have a better word for it, but like if you have like an arranged marriage, right? The parents are picking the marriage couple. That's not exactly natural selection, and it's
Hmm.
not like
Hmm.
individual selection. There's this like cultural tradition and individuals who are driving the selection. And then you have like what would you call it? Like tribal selection, if you want to call it that, where you have a tribe against a tribe, and the pressure isn't nature, the pressure isn't sexual selection, it's this neighboring tribe's going to wipe you out. And all of these
Hmm.
are simultaneous engines of competition and survival.
Totally. And what I also love, again, is that when you have like a sexual selection capacity, like the females are looking for cues in the male performance or the color or whatever it happens to be, that's in her genes. Like that whatever that is to value that is in her genes. So it's this like embedded detector of fitness, sexual fitness. And then on the male side, there's genes or probably codes that allow them to perform in such a way to do that. And the only thing is, I really like the idea that it's like we talked about last time with language, right? It's not that language is innate, it's that you're wired to, you're pre-wired to be accepting of a language like thing that's going to happen. And so this is the same thing with sexual selection, where the genes and the fitness is like stage one, but then within the system, this like self-organizing system allows for the detection and selection based on these kind of different cues.
And I don't remember if we talked about this last time. I know we've talked about it in person, but maybe we didn't record it. Tell me if you remember. So Richard Dawkins famously wrote this book called The Selfish Gene, and
Hmm.
it talked about how the genes focus on replication. And then he posited this idea that ideas can be propagated in our mind and in our culture. And the central unit he called a meme.
Hmm.
So the way that genes are propagated biologically, he said memes are propagated ideologically or in the mental cognitive space.
Hmm.
And that's where we get the word meme, was from Richard Dawkins.
Hmm.
Um, but what's interesting is like this idea space has this, and I forget the name, there's like a technical name in evolutionary theory of um, these ideas and memes sort of co-evolving with humans in terms of like our development of language. So we develop language, and then we develop this like cognitive, linguistic, cultural memory, let's call it
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And I don't like the word memory, but I don't know
I
what
get
other
it.
way
I
to
get what you're saying though. Yeah.
express it. And that like meta cultural language space evolves over time.
Yeah. It's so crazy. It's just memes all the way down. No, but all I'm saying, it's just like this recursive self-organizing thing, like the human brain, and then social structures, and then ideas that are shared, and then those ideas form like ideologies, and those form like ethics and laws and how things are conducted. It's just mind-blowing how it's all these like interacting feedback loops of information to create a structured self-organizing system. Yeah. That is super cool.
Yes. So the two topics that we kind of touched on was money as a game and
Hmm.
and the idea of parasitic games where like ideally the game is like practice to help you improve in the world, but like when you spend all your time leveling up your character rather than leveling up your life, that's maybe counterproductive.
Mm. Yeah, or spending all this money on rubies for clicker hero stuff. Is that kind of what you're getting at, that topic?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And this also connects to the idea of, should there be an age limit on when kids are allowed a smartphone or an age limit on when kids are allowed access to social media?
Mm.
And Height's argument is
Well,
there absolutely should be.
yeah. Well, before I get into that, I'd like to actually maybe make a little, uh, not devil's advocate, because I actually think this, that games can actually be extremely helpful and valuable for like thought development or cognition or like planning and strategy
Yeah.
um and honing your skills in that sense in a way that maybe isn't possible in the real world.
Well, look, I'm a mathematician, and a lot of people say, when are we going to use this? And one of my answers is it's a game. You're playing a logic game and you're honing your skills to solve abstract puzzles. And you may not use that skill explicitly in your life, but if you get really good at playing that game, it generalizes to other games.
Exactly. So it's in a game, especially computer games, you get to play in this abstract world with an abstract set of rules, and it doesn't matter what the variables are, but you can manipulate some things and that changes the outcome. And then once you get good at like visualizing scenarios in that sense, you can start solving problems or thinking about problems actually in the real world, real life, that you can apply that to.
Yeah,
Um,
and so I think about that in the best idealistic scenario, like a Mr. Miyagi situation, right? Wax
mhm,
on, wax off, and Daniel's saying, "Oh, why are you making me wash your cars? I thought you're supposed to be teaching me something." And he's
mhm.
like, "Oh, Daniel-san, I am teaching you something. You just don't
Right,
know it."
right. Yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to preface that games can be really good. I think they're very valuable and helpful, and I don't regret a lot of my time I've dumped into playing video games as a young adult because I think they've definitely shaped the way I think and
Mhm.
problem solve. I mean, that's what a game is. It's kind of like, here's a situation, here's the problem. And what's even more interesting, when you have an opponent, that is a constantly moving target
Oh
and
yeah,
makes you have to think a lot more dynamically and um, uh, intuition kind of thing that gets developed.
yeah. Like one of my dreams, we'll see if it happens, but I would really like to practice and get good at jujitsu. And
Mm,
partly because it's healthy, but my understanding from what people tell me is that it's really a strategy game where your body is the game piece. And this
hmm.
idea is just so insanely cool to me. Like like some people do yoga, which is like a personal experience, right? You're balancing your, I mean, you do it with other people, but like it's fundamentally like you're competing with yourself. But if you're doing jujitsu, like you have like you're competing with the other person, like you're getting healthy and like your moves, they know their moves, and then you have this like chess battle with your bodies.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any much closer than brain body versus brain body than jujitsu. It's like, and literally in proximity as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And what's also
yeah.
fascinating, almost all of the great spiritual traditions of the world use wrestling as a central metaphor.
Now, wrestling specifically, or any kind of like combat
Wrestling
martial.
specifically.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in the Old Testament, Jacob has this experience where he's like distraught, he's not sure what to do, and angel or God comes to him and he's like wrestling with God.
Hmm.
And it's just such a powerful image of, like warring with your conscience and this like
Hmm.
moral struggle. But it's also like this game.
Hmm.
And I think if you're a man who has that sort of practice and experience, it's like a very visceral metaphor. And it's same thing with Plato. I think Plato was a wrestler, and like wrestling
Hmm.
was big in ancient Greece, but he used this as like a spiritual metaphor.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't make that connection between like mind and body, and then yeah, that's really cool.
Well, and in almost all martial arts too, there's a mind body spirit or mind body heart where there's this implicit ethic or implicit like sense of honor and fair play.
Hmm.
Like you like bow to your sensei, and you know have all these sort of rituals where you take off your shoes here and you don't do this, and there's this like warrior ethos that has a deep sense of respect and honor.
Yeah, but at the same time, you still there's a uh, an objective goalpost or of who's more skilled than the other. There's like still that thing you're trying to push for when it
Yeah,
comes
well,
to.
there's definitely the competitive element, hopefully in a
Mhm.
sportsman-like spirit. And if you're the young person who's trying to learn, as a good mentor or teacher, you're going to let them win once in a while so that they have the experience of, okay, this is what winning is like. But if you just like say, hey, let's practice jujitsu, and you just get owned over and over and over again, it messes up the reinforcement. Because like let's say you do something right and you get punished, and you do something good and you
Because
get punished, like your brain never learns to separate a good move from a bad move.
right, for like chess, maybe they made a good move, but you know how to deal with that four moves down the line, and they're eventually going to lose anyways
Mm-hmm.
because you've had that experience. But maybe if you like make the obvious mistake that someone at their same level would make and allow them to exploit that, they can start to think about cause and effect and what could be good in certain situations or poor.
Yeah, so you have the meta ethic or a meta game, which is right. The goal of the game isn't to win per se. The goal of the game is to get good at the game and develop.
Hmm. Yeah, but you still have to have that sense of excellence. Like you want to strive to beat people. Like when we
Mhm.
play Dota or StarCraft or whatever, it's like you want to win. Isn't that like rule number one with most of the games that we make?
Well,
You have
so
to
it's
try to win.
it's interesting because the victory in in Greek, I think, is Nikeia, which is where
Hmm.
the brand Nike comes from. And there's this desire for victory or glory, if you want to call it that. And but there's also this sense of sportsmanship. So like if you can lose gracefully and learn and benefit from the experience, that might be more valuable in the long run than victory in the moment.
I agree. Yeah, yeah. But the point I was trying to make is that you still have to have that desire to win and effort to try to do your best to
Mm-hmm.
win, not do some kind of troll move where you join a game and then you like just make some obviously stupid choices in the game just to screw everything else up for everyone else.
Yeah, that's psychopathic.
But I remember we were definitely like, whenever we would play games, it's like, all right, you have to try to win. Basically, don't be trolling. Like,
Well, so for me, what I remember was that was a response to people who would deliberately lose because they didn't want to hurt people's feelings.
hmm, okay, yeah.
And so these people would just like play but deliberately lose, or play but not even make an effort to win. And it's like, why are you going to play a game if you're not going to make an effort to even try to win? At that point, you're not playing a game.
Right, they're trolling, which is their own kind of game that they find entertaining,
Well, no,
perhaps.
not even trolling. I mean, I'm just thinking about like, Mom or Leanne, who are just like super agreeable people, and they want
Mm.
everybody to be happy and get along. And they're
Oh, yeah,
like, oh
yeah.
yeah, I'll let them win because it makes them happy. It's like,
Right,
that's a different game. I mean, that's not a bad game, it's a different game.
right, right. Or when Lisa plays the Queen of Spades on you, it's like, I'm so sorry, I don't want it. It's like, no, no, you probably should do that. That was not a bad move.
Oh, the one that would like drive me crazy is when we were playing Monopoly and I don't remember if it was mom or Leanne or whoever. Let's just say it was mom. She would like make a deal to make someone happy. She's like, okay, Johnny, here's all my properties. And I'm just like, don't do this. Don't, that's a terrible
Right,
deal. What are you doing?
right, right,
You gotta at least try to win. Come on.
right, right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I was also thinking of other people we'd play with who would kind of troll us. So that one was a little more innocent, just trying to like be nice, but not realizing she was basically ruining the entire balance of the game by doing that,
Right. I mean,
and
as
the whole
well,
point of playing.
it was well meaning, but technically she was playing a different game, meaning her goal wasn't to win, her goal was to be nice, which, it's a great attitude, but for the wrong game.
Yes, correct. Right. You're trying to bankrupt each other here. That's the point of the game. Um, yeah. Or just like it, like if there was something where you could like, if you were playing this corruptor game, let's say, I,
Mhm.
as an example, and you had some player who just went all in on with the devil just to like screw it up or something. When there was no interest in actually trying to win. Now he just or she or is just trying to make the game environment crazy or something.
Well, it was especially frustrating for me because we were trying to design games and we're trying to get feedback to improve the games. And all we
Yeah,
got was like, oh, yeah, this game sucks. It has flaws and it should probably be shelved. It's like,
right. And look how I can exploit this thing somehow, or yeah, maybe. But so that's all to say. I think sportsmanship is good and all that, but I think it's super important to have some kind of like, I want to win. Like, there needs to be, because that's the main motivation, right? To get better, to be the best,
yeah, well, so I
to
would, I would,
perform.
I distinguish victory for the sake of victory with a pursuit of excellence. And ideally, so what's the word? So I just heard a talk about this. Competition comes from the Latin and it means to conspire together. And the idea is I'm going to give my best and then you're going to give your best. And then that causes me to raise the bar, which causes you to raise the bar. So there's this like mutually accelerating excellence through competition.
Yeah, but it's
Which,
also a credible record that this is true. Like you can demonstrate with, factual performance and show that yes, I have this capacity to do this
mhm.
thing.
Well, so there's two different types of excellence. So one is like a threshold of competence, let's say. And if you're above the bar, you cut it. If you're below the bar, you don't cut it. So it's a standard of excellence
Hmm.
versus the pursuit of excellence, which is more like constant improvement and seeking out the best so that you can become better.
Yeah, but there's always that goal to first place. That concept, I think, is on a lot of people's minds.
For sure, especially men.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
Well,
I
it's
think
not.
being
And you could
sportsman and
argue,
competition, yeah,
you could argue, and I think it's a solid argument that like the reason it exists in men's minds is because that's part of our evolutionary programming.
and to get there isn't easy, especially if there's a lot of other individuals doing the same thing. Yeah, and like you said, there's this iron sharpening iron, and the only way you get better is to like devise better strategies, make better, just what, or if it's a physical thing, prepare yourself better, condition your body better, do whatever it takes. Just some work that has some very difficult thing to obtain. Um,
And that's
yeah,
a
and it,
central tenet of capitalism is that competition drives the market, right? You're competing to offer more services, better products, and that competition is the engine that causes progress.
totally. Yeah, yeah.
And Jimmy said something I thought was so brilliant. We were talking at Disneyland about capitalism. And I said, what are your thoughts on capitalism? And partly I want to know what he was thinking, but I was also really obsessed with, capitalism versus Marxism kind of debate.
Hmm.
And he said something brilliant, which is capitalism is a system that harnesses the power of greed in a way that the public benefits from it.
Mm.
I thought that is a really brilliant description of what capitalism does. And it's like it doesn't have this denial of human nature. It says, yeah, people are greedy and competitive. So let's accept that that's a fact and then use it to benefit the public at large.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. And maybe some of these kind of competitive tendencies as well do have a dark side to them of I want to win or I want to be number one, like this egotistical thing, or I want to crush my opposition or something like that. But it still is pushing people forward and to achieve higher and higher things. So it's like there's some negative aspects to it, but then it can be routed into a positive.
Well, and that's the implied ethic, right? That's the
Hmm.
sportsmanship and the implied ethic. It's like if you're improving yourself, cool. If you're, what was their name? Like breaking your opponent's knees, uh, like
Oh,
was
like
Nancy Kerrigan?
Kerrigan?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like everyone just intuitively knew foul, not cool. Like, yeah, you want to win. That's not the way you do it.
Especially when you actually legitimately get to the top and then you do that. It's like, oh, come on. But yeah,
Well, then there's the whole drama. It wasn't her idea. It was her crazy boyfriend.
right.
Anyways,
There's a
but
whole
the
movie.
point is there's an ethic of competition, right? There's
Hmm.
an ethical, moral way to do it, and there are some foul, wrong, bad ways to do it.
Hmm.
And the argument is it's not just a theoretical ethic. Like this ethic is built into our biology.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow, I didn't realize that like games had such a broad application and impact on the way the world works and we operate.
Depending on how you talk to, everything's a game.
Yeah, yeah. You can put I guess you can look at through the world through the lens of a gamer or someone who's moving pieces around to try to change the situation or see how things can be influenced.
Yeah, I mean, and so you could say we're competing with other podcasters for people's attention. Like
Mhm.
maybe that we're not consciously doing that, but someone could interpret what we're doing in that way. And if we wanted to shift the direction of the podcast, we could definitely view it as a competition, see what people are doing and like model what they're doing that works. Or we could like create our own game, which is we're going to create our own niche and we're going to compete with ourselves to be the best we can in that niche and be the king of our own hill,
Mhm.
which is just a mindset or
Yeah,
a perspective shift.
right. Yeah. Or it's just kind of fun chatting too. I don't know if it's a game as much, but just spending some time
Well, I mean, you could argue that that's like
discussing.
the playing house game.
True. Yeah. Yeah. I man, are we playing house? Is that what this podcast is? Yes.
We're
Shoot.
exploring Simplexity.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I feel like we had a really great conversation and maybe a good time to wrap
Wrap it up.
things up. What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. What one closing idea? I think in a
Mhm.
sense we are playing. Like we're developing our brand,
Yeah.
we're developing our skills, like we're finding ways to improve and we're finding boundaries, like what are we going to do, what are we not going to do, like what are the rules of our game. Um, yeah, and not saying that that's what it is, but that is definitely a solid lens of interpretation.
Yeah. Or even when we're discussing things. A lot of times our discussion is kind of free flowing. It's like, well, if that's true, then what about this thing? And it's like, oh shoot. And then okay, but what about this? And you're we're thinking about how these things are connected and how they're influencing one another. And that's exactly what a game is. Trying to figure out who are the players and how can you move things to, or how does the system move things to obtain a goal? So,
Yeah, well, and what's even fascinating, and this is the last idea, I promise. classically
Soccer.
speaking, classically speaking, in Greece, there's this idea of a dialogue, and dia means two, and then log means logos, which is the
Mhm.
root word of logic and truth. And the idea of a dialogue, like a Socratic dialogue, is that two people are going to explore an idea and sharpen each other's minds to get closer and closer to truth. And that's the essence of a dialogue. It's this like cooperative endeavor, like which ideally is what the scientific process is, right? I'm going to offer you
Mhm.
some criticism, not because I want to destroy you, but because I want to sharpen your argument, and vice versa. Like you're going to find my flaws and then I'll clean up my act, I'll sharpen up my argument.
Mhm.
And then you can contrast that with a debate. So the point of a debate is verbal combat. Again, not you're not trying to destroy somebody like the online memes,
Mhm.
Ben Shapiro destroys the feminist. It's like,
Right.
no,
Right.
what you're doing in a debate is like verbal martial arts.
Mhm.
The point is the competition, and you're
Right.
trying to like show your verbal skill in your competition in a debate, which is a different mindset. So, and
Mhm.
that goes back to the Greek word Nikeia, right? Your aim is victory as opposed to knowledge or truth, and they're
Mhm.
both useful, right? They both have their own arena, and yeah, I think we're kind of more on the dialogue exploration side, but there's definitely room for useful debate as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, explore is the first word in our podcast name, so I think that's kind of the feeling we're getting.
The
I
ethos,
like it. I personally like that. Yeah, the ethos um, makes things curious. We should
yes,
always be curious.
that's right. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe, and remember, always be curious.
All right.